He's a senior penetration tester and software engineer. He's the CEO of White Dragon, and he has extensive experience with breaking applications and various other sorts of targets. So according to Mike, it only takes 20 seconds to hack most universities across North America. So this talk is going to focus on how to find vulnerabilities in their systems and how to chain exploits blindly to own the system based on real world examples. So this looks like it's going to be an exciting talk. So take it away, Mike.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and excited to give this. A bit about who am I? CEO of Winter Dragon. I used to be a lead security engineer, systems administrator, software engineer. My business does web application attacks, penetration, and also the defense side of it. And it's also handles stuff like denial of service attacks. And I've been doing this for over 10 years now in total. So a fun thing to do. A little brief agenda on this one. I'll talk about scanning over 80 universities across North America, finding vulnerabilities blindly in them and chaining them together automatically, and then rooting all the boxes in about 20 seconds, all blindly, all automatically. So for scanning, I targeted universities and colleges in North America specifically. The universities and colleges around here, they usually have pretty outdated systems with just getting facelifts. Upon initial inspection, I noticed a lot of them are using custom SaaS software. Looks like PHP and a custom framework. I dug into the vendor of it, and I noticed that they also have other customers who are like regular shops and stores. So I found 150 customers affected just with Google Docs, and I was able to find over 500,000 people's information, 15 years worth of data, sales, all your information, even credit card details that were sitting there that no one patched. So I think of security when testing as a chain, finding steps to make the exploit. So a little curl here, which I found two things, Apache 2425, and the set cookie is giving me the PHP session ID. And I logged that down because it's probably going to be useful. And one of the first things I always start doing is I go ahead and I open Derb or GoBust or any of those and start scanning for obvious URLs. And in here, I notice there's the standard About Us pages, but then there's an admin link, code 200, size 5590. And upon accessing it, the admin panel pops up. And as we all know, it's definitely best practice to leave your admin panel exposed to the world, because that's just inviting us. And my goal is to make it into the admin panel. And some questions I threw up, like, what does the admin panel look like? Do I have to use, Internet Explorer or any other old, outdated tech to access it? And what vulnerabilities are on the inside? I'm going in blindly, so I'm not sure what it's gonna look like. So now I start doing some scanning. First obvious target on this one is I tried the classic cross-site scripting with the user agent. Now, half of me prayed this wasn't possible and isn't going to work, but I tried it anyways, and I targeted the admin URL. I thought if they're going to be monitoring anything and they left their admin page open to the world, It's either a honeypot or they're actually, allowing people to sign into the admin remotely. So I sent away the curl request here, and about a day later, I got back a hit on the cross-site scripting from someone viewing the page. I found their PHP session ID cookie and the URL addresses for all the internal admin pages that were available. And this is what it looks like. It's got a bunch of configuration settings, email settings, a raw file manager, as well as all 10 plus years of email history, how they plan their courses out, and all these internal systems just exposed to the web. I could look at emails from 15 years ago that are just being scraped off of old archives. I could also look at emails that were being sent, like your shipment order, your order has been received, your course is purchased, and all this other stuff. So I started wondering to myself, what else can we do in here? So I took another stab. I deployed a LAN scanner to probe their internal network. I looked for all the links that I could possibly crawl. I recorded content in iframes and just dumped them and post the results back to my control server. I found a bunch of hosts on the network, and I found also vulnerable things like point of sale machines, point of sale printers, and all these other IoT devices on it. So from the cross-site scripting, I have their PHP session ID. And I started wondering, is it exploitable? Because they're giving it out, and most systems by default aren't going to give you the PHP session ID. So I'm going to try to set a random ID to see if I can get the server to give me that session. So I tried on the admin page where I saw a set ID parameter. If you go from HTTP, it'll upgrade you to HTTPS and give you that parameter with your session token. And in here, I make the request, and I see the set cookie comes back as exactly the cookie, exactly the session ID I entered. So I'm thinking this may be one way in, but it's pretty manual. So I'm not convinced I want to go in this way. So I start probing around, and I find include directories in all these systems that have standard files like authentication in them. Given the system's already effectively given me a way in if the session's still active, I'm going to craft a simple SQL injection and see where it leads me. And it didn't work as I expected. The main admin login page just gave me invalid username or password. So they're using some basic filtering there. And because I didn't want to set off too many alarms, I took my time and I started scanning again for other directories. So I noticed they have some HTTP basic authentication going on. It looks like older legacy systems. So I'm wondering, is it vulnerable to like a blind SQL injection in the HTTP basic authentication? So here's my payload, simple PostgreSQL syntax, just trying to break the query intentionally, assuming it's running a query. And it turns out it is. The page immediately broke with HTTP error 500, and it could not finish the request. So knowing that there's a SQL injection here that's blind, a lot of automated tools like SQL Map can't easily test SQL injection in HTTP basic authentication. It's hard to do. So I went for something different. Can I get a local file inclusion or remote command execution from it? And with a bit of probing, I figured out it's using PostgreSQL. So PostgreSQL comes with some basic functions that are enabled. Like you create a table called hacks with a description field, and you can copy into the hacks table the exec password file. You can copy, the site's enabled file, and then you can select all that content from the database, that table you just created. But upon probing, the CMS SaaS software that these companies are using is exposing a table called front end. The front end is just all the contents of their website. So while I could try to brute force my way blindly to get the data, I could also render it right to their home page. So copy into the front page content from exec password, curl grep for root to start, and get 80 lines above and below it into exec password content. And this is what showed up. All their exec password for their system. And I also was able to get a bunch of other data on demand, including the source code of the files, and just dump them to the front page of the universities or any page that existed. And now that I've got my scan done here, I got the database field names. I know how the authentication works. And now I'm going to create myself an admin account. And for Bobby tables, Bobby drop tables. So I make my SQL syntax. And I start my login. I enter the login information, and there was no encryption on the passwords at the time because they had it intentionally disabled. And I got my own backdoor account into it. And the backdoor account, now I can view all the information on my own without having to just pray for cross-site scripting to execute. I can view all the logs, the staff information, and modify that same website contents from their backend. And now I want to automate it. I can change everything that I've built here so far to be automated. I'm going to use the user agent cross-site scripting. I'm going to change usernames and passwords so I can impersonate legitimate users, and I'm going to spoof the legitimate administrator who did the executed the payload. So this is my first iteration, basic JavaScript, sending it over. I get the session ID, create an account, and post it. And a big issue with this one is because I'm doing it from the cross-site scripting of the user, it, in system logs, until further investigation, will look like that legitimate user did these tasks. So it helps throw off initial tricks. When I start probing it, I see like their session management system. When I go there, I immediately got hit with my own cross-site scripting attack. So this is the page which was vulnerable. It allows them to watch, the user sessions in real time and can view all the users' info, their personal information. Everything was there, including card information, except for their password. Their password was filtered out. And this is how that page looked. You can search for the date range, how long they were there, when they stopped, how many clicks, the last path, and if they were logged in. There was also an order management panel, which was really interesting. You could view order information, the name, the email, the number, how much paid, and the administrator can refund anyone online. And I was thinking, refunding online, they're either going to do it two ways: try to post a negative transaction, or if the payment processor will support a proper refund, it'll do it that way. So I tested my luck, and I tried to give a refund to Bobby Drop Tables for their $27 order with a $995 refund. And it went through, but was quickly pulled back after about an hour. So it looks like they're just trying to do a negative transaction back into your account. Now I'm going to go for root. So probing, there's a configuration editor, and it allows you to edit the raw PHP configuration on it. So I just put in my payload, netcat, and I got the www data user from it. And there's many other things I can do from it. But for now, I've got full admin account, SQL injection, a shell as the www data user. I can elevate en route to this on the servers because the kernel's vulnerable. Their whole distribution server for products was also vulnerable to the same exploit. So I can also backdoor all their future product releases. And their client source code was there too. So I can put malicious source code on their desktop applications as well. So with my shell, I just went ahead and I created a admin page here. And I just dumped it into the admin directory. And upon loading it, it gave me my exact contents. So it looks like they're scraping anything in the admin directory dynamically and trying to include it. And now I'm going to dump the databases because I have the RCE and the database credentials are hard-coded in the config files. I'm going to dump all the data from everyone. So using pgdump, gzip, and scping it out and removing the copy. Here's one with 264 megs of data, and this was just for a time period of 1 month of their data. And that contained everything in their system. Everyone's information, all the logs, transactions, history, everything that was there, it's here. And so a recap on this, I got the copy of the database, got all the password hashes. Some of them were hashed, some of them weren't. There's a configuration options to remove it. The user information, all the order details, enough that with some reasonable effort, you could easily steal a lot of people's identities, admin backdoor, and then deleting some of the evidence we were in the system. 5 exploits were used to go from unauthenticated user to full shell. And now it's time to automate this to hack all the other universities running the software. And here it is, about a dozen lines of JavaScript, automated everything, including sending the data, creating the backdoor, and launching a shell. And all it takes is someone to review a session, and with a bit of social engineering, you can get it triggered almost quickly. Just call them up, say you're having an issue with their website, they'll go in and review your session, and the payload gets hit. And I want to touch a brief bit about how this could have been prevented. Proactive monitoring. Google Dorks found all the vulnerable hosts. And there's many automated tools that will let you do this. When I was probing, I could enter any sort of payload into it. There was no application firewall, there was no monitoring, there was nothing in place that would give anyone any clue I was in the system, unless I did something completely obvious like crash the entire server. But even at that, they'd probably just reboot it. And dropping the session ID sending. They're explicitly sending out the session IDs, and that's just asking for session hijacks on this one. They can be removed, and there's no legitimate reason, in my opinion, to inject a session ID in this case. Or really in any cases, even upgrading HTTP to HTTPS, you should be forcing HTTPS already. Clearly, they failed their regular audits, or they've never been audited before by anyone, because they need proper security audits. And this just looks and smells like some black box PCI compliance audit or some attestation of compliance without any real auditing. Their developers need to test their own code and their peers' code. Like, it looks like no one bothered to test, or they just have a lot of garbage hanging around that everyone forgot to remove. Anything from the OWASP top 10 or cheat sheets would be good to start. And this should go without saying, but please don't make your admin panel public to the world. Whitelist access by IPs to trusted origins if you really need to, but it should just be internal user ranges only. And all these admin pages were indexed by Google. At least try to hide your admin page from the world if you're going to leave it open. And I figured out when testing, there was only two types of accounts. There was, customer user accounts, and there was administrator accounts. There's no access control on them. So if I just had a regular admin account, I could do anything that, the super administrator and the systems administrator could. Unfortunately, most organizations like the universities, they don't, at least on their web front, they haven't implemented a lot of the proper access controls, or they have baggage hanging around that'll let you just circumvent them. So taking that away and leaving it out would be the proper solution to that. And if you're going to keep your session IDs, at least have some other forms of authentication, like single sign-on, and have some two-factor authentication going on. The systems that were hijacked here for the universities had two-factor authentication. All the accounts had it enabled, but because the session ID allowed me to jump through it, they pinned your two-factor authentication success to your session. But they didn't check any differences, like if you're accessing it with curl versus the web browser, or your IP, or your country. None of these basic security fields were bothered to be checked. So definitely checking all those is a good way to start blocking this. And it's not foolproof, but two-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication is definitely a step that all these places need to get implemented. And because the universities and colleges and all these other shops were using third-party vendors, you've got to check out what your vendor's security is. Make sure your vendors are undergoing some audits. Make sure, they're not just saying, hey, our stuff's secure. Take the time and actually test their stuff. Do some basic tests on it and see if it's actually secure. If you can just put, some basic SQL breaking syntax in it and it breaks, this isn't the vendor you need to go with. And controversially, fully understand the risks of the environment you're exposing. In this case, all these people's personal information, up to 15 years old worth of data was available. So limiting how much data you actually keep and store and limiting what functionality is available. And that's it on my my side here. Is there any questions?
All right, well, I'll jump in and thank you for a pretty awesome presentation. So
It's really scary how many things are vulnerable. Like I don't work as a red teamer or a pen tester. So I mainly I learn about exploits when I write about them. But to listen to someone who security tests talk about very specific vulnerabilities and exploits, it always kind of hits me emotionally.
that is certainly true. I guess my question for you is, universities have this gigantic estate and arguably one of the most hostile networking environments known to mankind, because this is, a lot of them have computer science programs and they're all out kind of for blood. Have you seen any sort of extra effort to isolate or segment these networks? Because I mean, you laterally moved through the entire network without so much as any sort of like pause or concern.
Yeah, I've seen some which have made the effort, but a lot of them are they'll set up like a few VMs for their vendors to put the software on, but not actually apply any proper firewall policies or anything. So moving laterally through the entire network is becoming easier and easier. But there's a few bigger universities in North America that I've tested, and the max I've got is like basic cross-site scripting, and they handle those within a few seconds. Well, realistically a few minutes, but they're very quick. But I find anyone really leveraging vendors, it's this slow process. There's going to be lots of vulnerabilities that are just obvious if you just take the 20 seconds to test them.
Now, are you finding that this is because of because the universities are like, VPN is too expensive, VPN is too complicated, we're just going to put this stuff right out there? Is it lazy?
Yeah, I think half of it it's laziness, or the vendor has this strange requirement. Like one vendor, I know of, they don't have any jump box or anything, so they want direct public SSH access into all these machines without any.
Oh my God,
white.
That's almost a honeypot in this.
Well, exactly.
Yeah. So are you also seeing a lot of like out of date, unpatched stuff, or has that gotten a little bit better?
It's gotten a little bit better, but like one of the things I'm happy to report is one of the universities here, just 3 weeks ago, they finally killed off a server exposed to the public running PHP 4.
Wow.
Which is long since out of date.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I have a question. How often is outdated or legacy technology a factor in how easy these academic institutions can be to exploit?
Yeah, a lot of the software that I find them running on the web is outdated. And I think half of it is just because when software changes, especially any big breaking changes, not only do they have to test them, but they also have to train the entire staff team. And how much time do you want to spend? Let's say, you have 500 staff who need to use it, and something changes. Now you have to teach 500 staff members what changed. Versus if you just keep the one software they're trained on, they're accepting a risk that vulnerabilities are going to arise because they're not willing to pay the price of the upgrade in teaching the staff how to use it. So it's always a trade-off.
That's very much a human problem.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Kim, let's say goodbye, and we'll go to our break for our next speaker that's just going to be coming up shortly. Thank you so much for an amazing presentation. Really learned a lot, and a precarious situation in universities these days, I would say.
Thank you very much, Mike.
Thank you very much.